And hello everyone, welcome back to your Meteor tutorial. Today we'll be doing some refactoring, so we won't really be coding anything new, we're just taking what we have and just making a bit better, because currently our code, whilst it is great and all, it still lacks a few things which we can improve on. So if you do fall behind, here is number 7, we'll be working here. So if you want to follow along, you can just go down to number 6. If you have followed along up till this point, you can just continue with your code and we can go ahead and code everything up. So first of all, we need to disable quick prototyping. So every newly created Meteor project has a package called Insecure installed by default. The package allows us to edit the database from the client. That is what we have been doing this whole time. And it is really useful for just quick prototyping. But we do need to remove it because, as the package name suggests, it is insecure. So what we can do is we can go here and stop our project from running. Okay, and then we can just say Meteor remove insecure. And now once we have removed this, our app changes won't really work anymore, since we have revoked all the client-side database permissions. So if we try to insert a new task, we're going to get an access denied. Now the way around this is to create a method that has been specifically created to put data into the database. And then we can use a special method provided by Meteor called meteor.call. And this will call the method and allow us to modify the database by calling the method. And it will send all of the data and stuff through a secure environment instead of just doing everything on the client side. So while we wait for that, we can go here and we can go to our imports, and then inside our API folder, we can create a new file called tasks methods.js. And all our task methods, such as inserting data into the database, making it checked or unchecked, and deleting data from the database, everything will now go inside of here. And here we go, insecure removed from your project. Once it has done that, you can just say Meteor again to start up your project once more. Now in here, we want to import two things. First, we want to import check from Meteor/check. And this just allows us to check the data that has been inserted. So if we want to make sure a specific value that has been inserted is of type string or type number, then we can use this. We also want to import task collection from, and we can just import it from this task collection. And this is just so we can interact with the database. Now here we can declare a meteor.methods. And this methods allows us to create the methods. So to create it, we can go and inside of a string, we can say tasks dot, and here we can say what we want to do. So this is just so we know that we're going to be working with the tasks database. So this right here, that's optional, but it is recommended, so you know this insert is specifically used for tasks. You'll have the same if you maybe have multiple collections in your database, which means if you just have multiple tables, then you will have multiple of these names. And this is just a way to know which tasks belongs to which collection. And here you can just say insert, because we want to insert data into the database. And then we can just say what it should take in. In this case, we wanted to take in text, because this text is what's going to be inserted into the database. And let's quickly try something here. So let's log in. I think it was user and password. I think that was my default username and stuff. Okay, here we go. Now let's say I try to delete or let's say I try to add something new here, add task, you'll see nothing happens. Now the reason nothing happens is if we go to our console, then we'll get a bunch of user is undefined errors. And this is because we removed our access to the backend from the front end. So we can't really do anything. So now that I try to delete that, you saw that it came back. And as you can see here, access denied, because we do not have access to deleting anymore. Same with checking, we cannot do that, so access denied. That is why we're going to do it here, and it's just more secure. That is the reason why we're doing it like this, because if we want to publish our application to an actual website, it would be very smart to make sure it's as secure as possible. Now let's get back to this. First we want to do a check to see if the text is of type string. So this check is optional, but it is recommended because if the text inserted here is, let's say, a number, then this check will fail. And that is what we want. So we only want to get strings here. So it's just some basic typing with Meteor. Then you want to check if not this dot user ID, then. Now what we're saying here is if not this dot user ID, and this refers to this Meteor right here. And Meteor contains all of these things like the user ID, the username, all of these things. And we can just say dot there. And that is what this is referring to. It's referring to the data inside of Meteor. So we are searching the user ID. If there is no user ID value returned to us, that means that this user is not logged in. So they're not authorized to change the data. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw a new, whoops, I probably just want to spell throw right, new Meteor dot error. So we're going to throw a Meteor error here that says not authorized. And there we go. I'm going to just hide this by saying Control and B. And I'm going to drag this a bit down so we don't have to see it the whole time. So we're checking, is the user logged in? Because can we see a user ID? If not, throw an error and say you're not authorized to do any of this. But if we don't have any errors being thrown, then we can just continue. And then we can access our task collection. And we can say dot insert. And in here we can insert the text. And we can insert the created at, which will be a new date. And we can also insert the user ID, which would be equal to this.user ID. So it's exactly the same as what we've been doing this entire time, I believe, with task form. As you can see here, it's basically exactly the same. And this text right here, that's just ES6 syntax, because this is the same as saying this. That is all that I'm saying here. So we can do that. As for this trim method right here, I'm going to trim the data before we insert it into the database here. So before it goes into this insert, that text right there is already going to be trimmed. That's why I'm not trimming it here. But if you wanted to, you could trim the text here as well. Next, we want a remove and update method. So here we can just add a comma. So in these strings, we can just say task dot remove, and this will allow us to remove from the database. And we can just pass in the task ID that we want to remove. Now we want to check if the task ID is of type string. And then underneath that, we can just say, we can actually just copy this because it will be the same idea. A lot of these you'll see is relatively the same. So you could possibly create a function that does all of this for you. So just pass in the data and the function basically checks if these two have executed correctly. Anyhow, and then we can just say task collection dot remove and then the task ID, and that will just remove the item. Perfect. Next, we want to update the database. So if someone clicks on this check right here, it should update it. We can then say tasks.set is checked. And remember, these names are optional. I just use the easiest ones because they're the easiest to notice. So when you're like, how do I set it if it is checked? And you're like, oh yeah, task.set is checked. It just comes to your head faster. Anyhow, then you can pass in the task ID and whether that task is already checked. Okay, then in here we can check two things. I'm going to copy that there, and here I'm just going to paste it. So first we need to check that the task ID is of type string and that the is checked is of type Boolean. Boolean meaning true or false. Then yet again we can throw this here. So as I said before, you could put all of this inside of a function instead, and you can just call the function in each one of these. Anyhow, and we can say task collection dot update, and we're going to update the task with the task ID that was passed in. And then we also want to set, and here we can just say is checked. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. We're just selecting the task with the task ID, and then we're setting, that's what this keyword here means, we're setting the is checked, and it's the same, so is checked. We're basically doing this. So that's what we're doing. Because in here we'll pass in should it be true or false. And in here we set that is checked value to what we get. So we can just do this because that will mean the same thing thanks to ES6. We can save this. And now we can start using the code. But before we can actually start using the code, we have to go here to our, close the client here. We can go here to our server, and in main.js, we need to import our task method just so everything has access to it. So here I'm just going to say import, and you don't need to import anything from it. You don't even need to use it here. You're just importing it so our server will tell our app that we can use this data. We can use the functions inside of it. So you can just go slash imports. And as you can see here, slash imports would be here. We then want to go to API, so slash API. And inside of API, we want to do the tasks method. So tasks methods. And there we go. Save that, and now we can use the task methods anywhere within our program. So let's go to our task form right here, where we insert the data into the database. Now in this handle submit, we can just keep this here. So if the text.trim is equal to nothing, then we should return. And in here where we want to insert the data, we can remove this because we don't want to touch that anymore. So we can do that. And we also want to import Meteor. So import Meteor from Meteor slash Meteor. Okay. And we can now remove this task collection because we're not going to directly access it anymore. So let's remove that. And in here where we used to have the insert, we can just say Meteor dot call, and this call will allow us to access the methods inside of task methods. And here we can specify the one we want to use. So here we can say tasks and dot insert. That dot insert is the one we coded right here. So we go up, dot insert. We're calling this right here. But as you see, we do need to insert in another value. To do that, we can just go here to tasks.insert and say comma, and we can insert the text, and we can just say .trim as well. And there we go. Now we can insert data back into the database again. Save that, and now if I say add task, as you can see, it got added. So that is how we can now change all of the things to work how we need them to in a secure manner. And this code is also a lot more useful because now we can reuse this code without having to retype it every time. Also, you'll notice we don't need this user anymore. It has been grayed out, as you can see by VS Code, and if we select it, as you can see, we don't use it anywhere here anymore. So we can also remove this from here. Now here, instead of app.jsx, we can just close that so we can see a bit more here. Then we want to find wherever data is being inserted and updated. Let's go here and say, do we have a remove here? Here we go. So delete task. And instead of saying delete task, we can just, if we have Meteor imported, let's just make sure we do. We do have Meteor imported. So we can go here and say Meteor dot call, and we can call the tasks dot remove, and we can just pass in the ID, because the task ID we should pass in order to use that. So if we go here to let's see, task methods, then here with remove we take in the task ID and do all of that. So we have to pass in the task ID here, and now we can remove this piece of code here because we won't be using that anymore. And here we have the toggle checked. So now what we can do is we can go here and we can say Meteor dot call tasks dot update, and we can pass in, let's see, we first need to pass in the tasks ID and then whether it should be checked or not. So here let's pass in the underscore ID and also the not is checked, because if it is checked, because we're getting if this value here is already checked. If it is checked, we want to uncheck it. So that's basically what's happening here. We want to uncheck it. So we're going to send in the false value or the opposite value. So if this was true, then we're sending in false because we want to make it false. If we're sending in false here, then we want to make it true. Because if we go here to task methods, then right here you can see we're just inserting is checked. We're not changing it to true or false. That's what we're doing here. We're changing it to true or false. But of course, you can just pass a normal is checked in here, and then you can change it from here. But that is optional. That's up to you and how you prefer to code. We can now remove this task collections.update and save our code. But take note, we cannot remove this task collection here, because if I were to select it, then as you can see, we're still going here and finding data inside of the database. So we cannot remove that task collection even if we wanted to. Now let's see if it works. If I check this, does it? It does not check. If I delete it, it does not get deleted. What's happening? What errors are we receiving here? Tasks, here we go. That should be a dot remove. And this shouldn't be dot update, this should be set is checked. There we go. And now we should be able to check this. As you can see, we can check them, and now we can hide the ones that are checked. We can also delete them without any problems. And of course, we can add more. So currently, we are inserting, updating, and removing the data inside of the database in a secure manner. Next up, we need to separate the API and the database folders, because currently if I were to go here and just open up my file manager, this is to work with the database. This is to work with the methods. This is the API. This is the database. But they're both inside of the API folder. Whilst there's nothing wrong with it, it is just highly recommended that we have a database folder as well, just so we can have more order here. So here in imports, we can then just create a new folder and call it DB. And this will be for our database. And in this task collection, we can move that to DB. And here it says, are you sure you want to do it? You can just say move. Now we just need to make sure to update the new location of this everywhere. As you can see here, VS Code already did some of it for me. So it changed this to DB without me even having to touch it. But we should still make sure that it did it everywhere, because as you can see, your application is crashing. And that is because it didn't do it everywhere. So this is an app. Next, we can check inside of task methods. Go up. It's changed there as well. So next, we can check inside of the server. Did it change here? And as you can see, it didn't, because we were importing it with the special Meteor way. So VS Code didn't know that and just left it as is. But now we can just change this to DB. We can save all of these files, and our application should start working correctly again. And here we go. So we're not seeing any problems here. Now let's try and add something new just to make sure it works. Okay, and we're not seeing what we are expecting. And there, my Meteor server restarted, so I was maybe a little bit too hasty. And there, as you can see, it was added. Let's just remove. Removing seems to work. Let's try and add again, just to be safe. That works too. Try and check it. That works too as well. If all of these methods still work, you can still do everything without a problem. That means everything has been moved correctly. So just for interest's sake, let's go to task methods, and this where it says insert, let's try and change this to a Boolean. Let's try that and see what we get, just so we can understand what will happen if the wrong data is somehow inserted. So let's go here and just try and insert some data. We add a task, and here inside of this terminal, if we go like this, as you can see, we're getting an error. Scroll all the way up, and exception while invoking tasks.insert. Match error. Expected Boolean got string. So what you can do is you can put your string here again, and whenever this throws an error, you can catch it inside of wherever you call this method. And you can give like a little pop-up here that says invalid data inserted or error occurred. So that is what happens if the matches doesn't match. And that was our refactoring. Our code is just much more safer, much more secure, and also a bit cleaner with how we moved our things. In the next video, we'll be looking at actually publishing our website. So stay tuned for that. And I'll see you all again in the next tutorial.